The analogy I always use is this. If you came home today and somebody was sitting on your couch, would you know it? Well, of course you do. It's your house. It's your couch. You're not going to go sit in his living room. I don't even care if he wasn't there. I don't even care if he wasn't there for 2 days. He's going to cut your track, inevitably, where you stepped in there too far or whatever, and he's going to know you're in there hunting. And now all of a sudden, you might as well have shot a rifle shot through his picture window. He now knows he's being pursued. Things get progressively tougher going from there. To compound on that, if you got home today and mama said, hey, it's trash day tomorrow, can you run the trash out the back door to the alley? Would you know if somebody was hiding behind the back door? You're probably not going to know that. Leave him alone at home. Let him be him in his house. It's whenever he has to leave the front or back doors where he's in trouble. Because if I see him, I'm going to see him inside bow range. And then I tell everybody this: get the property, make the plan, enact the plan, trust the process. The trust the process part is the hardest part.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the Hunter's Advantage podcast. Today we are joined by a special guest, Mark Luster, land consultant, big buck killer, and apparently traveler to the South now. My buddy Jake said he met up with you pretty recently. So how's everything going on your end, Mark?
Good. Yeah, no, I had a good time down with Jake. He's got a beautiful farm, actually a couple.
Have you ever had a client that buys a farm and shoots a 200 incher on the first year like he did last year? That's pretty impressive.
And it is impressive. And I will tell you something that floored me. I mean, and don't get me wrong, kudos to you guys keeping her somewhat secret, I guess. But I getting down there, because he told me he shot a nice buck. I can't remember exactly how he verbiaged it, but I got there, and the very first thing he did is pull it out the truck. It's like, where did you shoot this at? I was like, you kill in Kansas or Iowa? I mean, he's like, I kill it right back there. Like, are you kidding me? Because it does not look like what is perceived as Texas deer. It's massive. Like on the skull, you're like, that could be anywhere in the Midwest or anywhere across the country where big, massive deer live. Because that deer is awesome. I mean, look, 203 inches and it busted like a 12 inches off. Yeah. That's awesome.
No, that looks like a Texas deer, but usually those caliber have about a 12, 14 foot fence around it. So
fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, that's a gorgeous deer. It's a once in a lifetime type deer. I know they hear that, it's cliche, but I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully he repeats it, multiple times over. He's got a gorgeous farm there.
I shot a 140 off of this place, and he was gracious enough. We were headed up to my family's in Oklahoma for Thanksgiving, and I hunted one evening with him and shot a 5.5-year-old buck off his farm. And he was like, "There's a pretty good one out here," and I was like, "How good?" And he showed me that picture, and I was like, "I will pass this for you, Jake, but I'm not going to run a friendship over this deer, but man, if there was ever one to run a friendship over, that was the one." It still had the beam at that point too, so I was like, "Wow." Grant, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, and it's funny how deer will do that. I mean, that deer ruined friendships many times. Unfortunately, I have found, and this is one of those things where people ask me, what helps you be qualified in being able to come to a person's farm, and then assess it in a day, if you will, and be accurate at what you do. And the funny thing about this is I viewed it as a curse in the past, because you get on a farm, you find a big deer, you get on a farm, whether it be permission or lease or whatever, and you put that deer in the back of the truck, and guess what? You don't have a farm that next year. I repeatedly have done that, and then, whether it be me and another person on a lease or permission or, whatever. And then I don't want to call it jealousy, but call it whatever you want to. But friendships will get stressed a little bit, over a big deer. And I've got to the point where I'm like, listen, I try to stay as deer drama free as possible anymore. So if I get permission and I kill a big deer on a farm and they tell me now that the neighbor's leasing it or whatever, I'm just gracious and say thanks and thanks for the opportunity to hunt your farm and go on about my business, because it's second second nature anymore to get knocked off a farm.
Yeah, a nephew comes out of the woodworks you didn't know existed. My nephew actually wanted to try this hunting thing out,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100%. I mean, grandsons of, my brother, I've had them all, and I've even went as far as say, hey, I mean, that's fine. And I mean, if they're early on in their hunting career or whatever, I'll help them. I'll show them the stands and they can hunt with me and what that's like, well, once you kill the deer, buddy, you just expect you're leaving, so.
Yeah.
I thought it was a curse, early on, I guess you could say, but once I'd done it several times, it kind of helped me hone my skill of learning a farm pretty fast, I guess you could say. Just and then just expecting that I don't have it the next year.
Yeah, that's a good point. I plan on showing my nephews, a few stands, but they're not going to be my stands or the good ones. So you could always take that route too.
You know what's fun? What's fun? We call that the old gar hole stands. And there's probably been more 200 killed out of gar hole stands than any,
That is true. That is true. Christian, I was talking about that the other day. The way we like to scout public is we just throw like a whole bunch of cameras down, or depending on what time of the summer it is, whether it's early or late. But usually when we're like gone a weekend and just specifically throwing out cameras, we usually have about 3 or 4 left that we're like, okay, well, we checked all the spots we wanted to hit. We threw out the cameras, and now we just have these extra ones. And so what we'll do is we'll just bail off the side of the road somewhere, go hang them up. And almost 9 times out of 10, those cameras are the ones that have the biggest bucks on them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've found that a lot in the Midwest, too. Going along with what you're saying is the out of the way places. All these people, they'll pile into the biggest timber they see and all that stuff. Shoot, give me a prairie with a couple of little timber blocks or a CRP field. You think that there's no deer in the world in it, and that's where I'll find the biggest deer usually.
I bet. So, speaking on kind of the consulting tour, I think the majority of that work kind of gets done late winter, probably before the green up. But where all have you been this consulting season? You see anything special?
You know what? Yeah, every year I see some really, really nice farms. I'm blessed in that side of things. I retired from the Illinois Department of Corrections, and I do this full time, I guess you could say. But to your point, yeah, usually late in middle of December through spring green up, usually middle of April up here, I guess you could say. But yeah, I've been Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Minnesota. I got to go to Michigan yet, coming up. If I didn't say Pennsylvania, it was Pennsylvania as well. They're kind of all over. But I'll tell you, this is the most rewarding job I've ever had. I went from a prison setting, which was pretty thankless, but to this, which has been awesome. And I'll talk deer to an oak tree if it'll listen, So, I mean, it's something I'm passionate about, something I love doing, and there's nothing that has been more rewarding than a client sending a text and he's killed the biggest deer of his life. That's fun, and that makes it all worth it, so I absolutely love what I do now.
That's awesome. It's funny you say the prison guard. My dad was a prison guard for several years in McAllister, Oklahoma. It's like a max security prison, and gosh, he had some crazy stories about working there. It was
it's probably something we can't talk about on here. I've had some bad ones. I've been out of the prison almost 3 years now, and I still have two active lawsuits on me that I can think about right now.
Wow. Well, let's dive into that.
One. I mean, I don't know how PG or not PG this is, or how back one of the lawsuits. Basically, an inmate was ready to parole. He was a pedophile, mom and dad wouldn't let him parole to their place. So he was waiting on bed space to open up at a halfway house. In that time frame, he hung himself, killed himself. And the family is suing everybody there. And I'm one of them. So there's that kind of stuff. It's great, And then I got another guy that is suing me. I don't even know how they get this stuff in. But basically he's suing me because he didn't get the proper lotion for his allergies. And he somehow has me pegged into that because I was the supervisor in that unit.
You kind of gave up that right when you committed crimes of the life of luxury.
That's the thing I don't understand. The thing is they know they fill out a bunch of these lawsuits and they're just frivolous. If they would make it to where these people have to pay for all of the court and all of those filing fees and all of that stuff, if they lose the case, a ton of this would go away, but they don't. And they know if they file this bull crap lawsuit that it's going to go to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General is not willing to put very much time invested in that. And they have just figured that it would just cost them less money to just pay them out $1,500 or whatever for it and be done with it. Well, the inmates all figured that out. So now it's just a payday. It's a job. It's a job. I'm going to sue the state for everything. And I know that the state will pay it because it would cost them more to litigate it. So they just pay it. It's just it's a check.
That's insane. I didn't know anything about that.
It's nonstop. And then, the end of the day, the parents of the person that killed himself, hung himself. If that family would have let him parole to their house, he wouldn't have been there. But now that they didn't want him there and this happens, then they want to sue the state for a stupid amount of money, acting like we're the ones that did it. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty much guessing that he felt like he didn't have nowhere to go, no family, sad as it may be, he's a pedophile and I have zero remorse for that situation.
Yeah. Speaking on the suing side of things, it's crazy that litigation stuff now. Like you hear that people trying to get permission with deer hunting properties now, and everybody's scared of getting freaking sued. Like somebody breaking their ankle and they're like, well, now I own your property, because I went and got hurt on it. That's scary.
It is. And you're right. Everybody's sue happy anymore. We could get into politics, but probably most of our listeners would probably follow along just fine, but we'd certainly offend somebody. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's going to happen regardless as soon as this airs.
But Jake's been upset for like 5 months that Kamala lost. So I get it. Exactly.
Well, he did show up with a Ford. So I told him we could probably have been friends, but he was driving a Ford. So I don't know. We're crossing some lines there. I had to tell him he needed to switch companies.
So are you a Dodge guy?
I am diehard Chevy GMC. I'm a big gearhead too. Now I will say, I have my own personal opinions. They're my personal opinions. So, if somebody from Ford watches this, don't sue me. It's just my opinion. But my thing is this. It is my belief that Ford Motor Company basically dislikes the blue collar worker of America. I will tell you, but I bring receipts, basically. This is why I say this. Going all the way back into the 60s, Ford had 3 different 351s. You could barely interchange anything on them. One of them was even a big block. They change everything on purpose to limit supply, create demand, and make you go to Ford Motor Company to buy the part. It is nonstop. That's the way it's been since. That's their business model. And don't get me wrong, I'm a capitalist. I get it. But for the guy that's working hard for a living and struggling and not doing that well. If you got Ford, vehicle and they've limited those supply and they create demand and they bump it up and they make it to where you have to go to them to get the parts and then the prices are way high. I just don't like that model. Now, off the Chevy side of things, any small block Chevy from yesteryear, you could interchange any head you wanted to, the intake, everything interchanges there. Still tooing, including the LS based engines today. You can interchange all of those heads. The only one that you can is their big block version, but that 4.8, 5.3, 5.7, 6.0, 6.2, all of them, all your heads interchange, your intakes interchange, everything interchanges. There's plenty of supply, so demand is low, prices are low. That's why if you go to a racetrack, 80% of every Ford Mustang that pulls up on that line is running a Chevy drivetrain. Yeah. So there's a reason for that.
I think that's about with anything. I mean, I'm not too familiar with the Chevys and stuff, but I know Dodges are getting more where you're kind of having to take them into the dealership just for simple things. Like every now and then we'll get like a pickup or a Dodge pickup, whether that be a 1500 or a 3/4 ton or something like that. And we'll buy it wrecked, fix it up, and then drive it for a bit and then try to sell it for a little bit of change. Sure. And even something as simple as adding a little bit of transmission fluid now, especially in the half tons, they don't have any more dipsticks or anything like that where you can check it and add it in. You got to basically put it in neutral, get it to a certain temperature, and then get up and under it and like basically squeeze a bottle of training fluid in that until it starts dripping over. And it's like they're making a 8-step process when, 15 years ago we had a 2-step process just to add a little bit.
Probably change the headlights in half these anymore.
Oh, you gotta get housing in half.
Yeah, that ain't no joke.
My wife got a Jeep Grand Cherokee. We had to take the entire front bumper off of it to change the headlight. I mean, what is going on?
Because that labor is $150 an hour. That's why.
But that's the thing. They try to make it where you can't do it. So you have to take it into the dealership, and it's crazy. It's a money grab. I hate it. I like doing things myself. I mean, maybe I'm not that good at it, but at least I did it myself.
Well, you fit right in then, if that's the case.
That's funny. Well, kind of sitting in the vein of, kind of Southern hunting and stuff. Obviously, I don't know how much time you spent in the South. You obviously consulted on Jake's place, and I'm sure you probably looked at other places, like you said, Oklahoma. I'm curious what your kind of general thoughts are in like whitetail management and consulting and property design in like bait states, because you see a lot of, I guess Kansas is one of them too, but I'm interested how that kind of that model changes when you're hunting in a place where you got 40-acre chunks and people are putting bait on every single corner.
That's a very good question. I will say this: I try at all costs to get the client, if at all possible, to plant food plots. Don't get me wrong. We will use bait, but if you guys are both from Texas or in and around that, I mean, you are in a bait state, but everybody baits and everybody's trying to make the better pile or the better feeder or the better whatever. And don't get me wrong. You can get in some areas of, especially Texas, you get into huge properties. So, I mean, you're not necessarily, elbow to elbow with all of your neighbors in that manner, but there's a lot of bait states that are. You go get into, say, Ohio, in some areas that's really broken up and everybody's baiting. A whitetail is a grazer by nature. God intended them to be a grazer. They will go to that food plot 10 out of 10 times over that feeder. That feeder they do associate with food, but they tend to associate that with humans as well. How many really big deer do you usually kill over a feeder? You might have to get downwind of that 50, 60 yards or 100, and he might be hanging up before he commits to that, say, or that feeder or something like that, or bait of some kind. But they tend to, whenever I get food plots in place, they tend to walk out in those food plots and be a lot more comfortable and a lot less, I don't want to call it less alert, because I don't know that I've ever seen a not alert deer, but a little more calm.
Dead one. Yeah, a dead
one. Yeah, a little more calm. So And don't get me wrong, I definitely use it as a tool because it is 100% a tool. And in some areas, it simply is impossible to get a food plot in. In some of the mountainous areas of say Eastern Kentucky or Southern Ohio, like I just came from, Southeast Ohio, Licking County area, and it's mountains. I mean, and you're struggling to get enough acreage to get a decent food plot in there. So sometimes that bait plays a huge role, but I try, if at all possible, to get them, a quality food plot in there because that food plot is the draw over everybody else. But typically I try to pick the stands. Let's say we're going to hunt an evening spot, right? So if we can get some kind of quality food plot in there, and then I typically, this is going to get long winded, so I apologize, guys.
No worries.
But I love doing like a green to grain transition. If I bring them into the green, I try to make that green food plot closest to where I think their bedding is, or kind of oriented to where they would naturally come into that green first. Like having your salad before a steak, so to speak. By the time you might want that steak, but when you have that salad and you eat that salad because it's good, you end up half full and you don't end up eating your whole steak because you filled your belly half full of the salad. Well, I try to do that because that is like clover or alfalfa, you're getting 5 to 6 tons an acre of forage there, and they can graze on that as hard as they want to, and they're not going to hurt it, if you will. But if you have a limited number of grain acres, so let's say you did milo or you did, beans are, the main one I'm thinking of right now. When beans come up, they'll walk right down those rows and just eat the heads right off of it. And you almost can't get anything even started in a high density deer area. So you got to either electric fence it off or whatever to try to get it to where it's a decent plot before they hit it. But like the reason I said milo is, milo in areas that have less rain, they do better in a more arid climate. Milo does than say corn, and the deer don't tend to eat it growing at all. So they might bed in it a little bit, but they don't eat it at all growing. So you basically, everything you plant and you have there, you get it to where it's at least headed out, and you get all of that tonnage for late season food and so on and so forth. So I try, if at all possible, to get that. And then I inhibit their ability to get to the grain, from that bedding. And I feed them into the green, create my pinch between the green and the grain. And then my pinch is where I want to have my blind or my stand or whatever with a killer egress. The best stand in the world is only as good as your ingress and egress. If you got to blow up that field when you leave, if the deer that you're after doesn't show up, it is the epitome of hunting pressure, and your results will be minimal at best. The way I always tell everybody is if you got kids and you ever had to sit in an auditorium for a play, and you ever with the curtain down and or closed, and you hear the little kids pitter pattering behind the curtain. Next thing you know, one of them peeks through it like this, and then they close it and run off and pitter patter. And that's what we want to do in the deer's world. We want to just go up into wherever our stand or blind is, peek through the curtain for 3 or 4 hours, close the curtain, and leave without them knowing we're there. If we can do that, essentially you're recreating that. And, have you ever heard the saying that the first time you ever hunt a stand's the best time? Well, of course, I mean, it actually is, they've never smelled where you came to and from there. They never seen you do it. They never seen you in the stand or blind. They never smelled you in the stand or blind, and they never seen you getting down or leaving out. You truly have the element of surprise. But if we design things to where we can just peek through the curtain and watch our area, and then we've designed it in a way we can pinch them within bow range before they get to where they're going, and then we can leave without them ever knowing they was there, then we've successfully laid a trap that we can hunt, very lethally. And I try to, like on different, depending on the size of the farm, if it's a big one, I tend to try to quadrant it up in, 160 to 200 acre chunks, and then try to provide that deer everything that a mature buck wants inside each and every one of those quadrants. Because every now and again you get that bully, that's just simply doesn't tolerate other age class deer his age. And he'll run them off. I mean, that might be a 120-inch 5-year-old, whereas he might be running your 170 or 80-inch, 4-year-old off or whatever. And I want to make certain, hopefully, we can provide enough of those spots that where even if he is run off one of those areas, we've given him other areas to take up residence, and that kind of shifts back and forth as different deer die out, but as a general rule, that's the model, if you will. I know that was long-winded and I apologize for that, but
No, I'm with you. This might be a pretty broad question, but what makes a good pinch? Because you go from the green to the grain. And so is it terrain, or do you try to manipulate that in some way? How do you go about it?
It's all of the above, but that's another really good question. If the good Lord provided us something, whether it be a ditch or an oxbow in the river or whatever might be the case, where there is a natural pinch point, and I have an ability to get food on one side and the other side of that ditch or pinch, then I'll use that as the pinch. If not, then a lot of times I'll plant, whether it be switchgrass or, if you're wanting something, taller or immediate, if you do one of the bags, the screen in a bag or whatever. I always tell people, if they do that, go a little bit less on the seed rate than what they even call for and hit it with some nitrogen. Because I don't know if you guys have ever planted that stuff, but it looks great in the summer and it'll get 8-10 foot tall. And you're like, man alive, that's a wall. That looks great. And then in the fall, when this stuff starts dying out, it's too thick and the stalks are too thin, and winds and rain and stuff comes and they end up all folded over and it's no screen at all. It just looks like a mess before it's all said and done. But if you kind of thin out that seed rate a little bit and add nitrogen, the stalks will get a lot thicker and it'll withstand the weather a lot better, and maintain a quality screen. There's a bunch of little tricks in that kind of thing, but essentially, ideally, you want, the food plot to where they come into the green and we want to feed them through to the grain. Usually if they come into the green first, they will graze through into the grain being the destination food source, if you will. I typically try to create better bedding if we need to, behind the green or the grain over there, usually right where the green meets the grain or close. And, because I want, in a perfect world, we get them bedding as close as we can to where they're coming to that too. So their distance time frame will get them there before dark. If let's just say they got 15 minutes that they're comfortable walking before dark, if he has to travel 500 yards to get to that, he might not make that before dark. But if he's only got to travel 150 yards, we might be getting him there. So try to get him his bedding, quality bedding in his bedroom. What he wants, again, more than half of their diet, even in Iowa, is natural browns, whether that be muleflower rose bushes, blackberry briars, saplings, acorns, mushrooms, whatever might be the case, whatever food source is in that bedding. But we try to make that as good as we can, whether we TSI that, open it up. Some farms are already there, but if we're trying to locate them, we'll have them log it or TSI it or whatever right off of that bedding, or make that bedding right off of that green side of that food plot. Because if we can bring them into that green, create the pinch right there, and then typically I'll always create the pinch where my stand works best for me to ingress and egress. And then, I always tell everybody, we kind of have a blank piece of paper here. We can make our Mona Lisa however we want to make it. So if we have the room and the ability, the acreage at which we can design it and lay it out in a manner that we inhibit their ability to get from one to the other, and we can key in on that pinch. I use woven wire fences, God's gift to the deer hunter, in my opinion. Yeah, they can like if you box that food plot in, they jump it everywhere there was a trail going to it. The moment you give them a gap, they'll walk 150 yards out of their way to just walk through an open gap. It's crazy. When this is done, if you guys want, I could send you a bunch of pictures and stuff. You can overlay, what I'm talking about, because it's nuts how well it works. Even a 4-foot woven wire fence, once it's been there a little ways, like even if let's say you got a 5-acre food plot and you're on one side of it, it's 125 yards wide by 300 yards long. And you're like, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I've got a great food source. Yeah, he's probably going to hit this a lot of days, but how do I get him inside range? If I have that situation and that's the only way I can do it, either I will go around, like 2 sides of it or almost 2 sides of it and put a woven wire fence and then put my stand 20 yards off the end of where that fence ends, because every trail in the world is going to come around the end of that fence. Every single one of them will pile around it. Then, and essentially, let's say I cut off 15 or 20 trails that was coming out to that food source, and now you shoved them around 2 trails around the ends of both sides of those fences. Think about how powerful your cameras will be. Think about how powerful your stand sites are now, because I've set these up and I've stopped these fence where I've got a egress that I can leave. If there's 50 deer on that field, I can still leave without blowing any of them up. Essentially that's the plan, and then you make that bedding, the best bedding you could make on the other side of that fence, because that's where you want him. Because once he's there, he has to come around that fence. He could jump it. Don't get me wrong. They can jump a 5-foot fence. But if they're calm, cool, and collected, they're walking around the end of it 99 out of 100 times. They'll walk right around the end of it. I found probably a dozen or 15 deer over the years hung up in a fence where their back leg got hung up. I think it's ingrained in their DNA. They know that fence will kill them or can kill them. And if they have an out, they just won't jump. It's actually pretty amazing. And you're just keying in on a trait of theirs that that they'll do. And believe me, that buck has the pendulum swung in his way way more than in our way, So if I'm in control of something, why not put in that effort if I can tighten him up to me, if you will?
So what you're saying is I probably should cut my neighbor's fence.
Yeah, make a hole.
I would ask him first.
Hey, it's a win-win. The deer will funnel right there. I get a few of his cows. Like, it's all good.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, you know how crazy we hunters are. That cow was probably way cheaper than that deer meat.
Honestly, probably. That's true.
What about, I'm thinking of a situation. Jake and I were out looking for some sheds the other day on a piece of his family land. It's got a real good pond, great access on a cold front for a north wind. And one of his family members had cleared a lot of cedars in this area. So there's a bunch of just, the ground looks like it's not tilled up, but it's just the dirt, and there's cedars laying everywhere. And we were talking about basically possibly, do you think you could use cedars, like stacking those up to create a funnel, or is that kind of
100%? We use it all the time. Like if let's just say that it was, I know that this is probably not, well, no, I bet you deal with this a lot in Texas too. But like if you're clearing out, say, an overgrown pasture or whatever, and you got a bunch of locusts or whatever trees where you're clearing, trying to make a food plot, do not pile up that debris and burn it in the center of windrow that stuff. It will work great. Now, the only thing I will tell you that you got to be cognizant of, where I first started doing this, I lined up a bunch of hay bales, right? And then I left one hay bale wide, right, where they could walk right through the gap into an alfalfa field. Every deer in the world would walk through that, but a mature deer. A mature deer would not walk. It's like they felt claustrophobic. You got to open up 4 or 5 of those hay bales. You got to make that gap 15 or 20 yards wide because they would stand on the backside of it, not like it, walk all the way to the end and come around the end of all of the hay bales. They did not want to walk through that gap at all. Now, here's the thing. If you did a fence and you left a gap, that gap could be 30 inches wide and every deer in the world would walk right through it because they can see to the other side. It looks like they felt claustrophobic with those hay bales up too high for them to see. They couldn't see the other side and felt like they was in a trap, which they were.
Yeah, something could pop over on top of those hay bales and be right on.
Yeah, or be waiting right on the other side and they not know it. You know, they did not like it. The mature deer, other deer would walk right through it, but mature bucks would not walk through that thing. I don't know. It's my own personal observation, but you know, one of the main things I will say where I see a ton of people making mistakes, and I tell everybody this, and it's the first thing I talk about in a consult. Most people they're thinking about themselves when they hunt. They plant this little hidey-ho food plot, you know, that is a kill plot, and they're not necessarily worrying about the deer's nutrition through the winter. If I told you to play the wind, right? Most people are like, well, yeah, no kidding, dummy. I've heard that, 57,000 times in my lifetime. I'm not blowing my wind where a deer's coming from. But most people, conventional thought is you get up in the morning, you look at southwest wind, whatever, you look at the weather, it says southwest, and then you go hunt a stand where the wind is right for you with the southwest wind. And you're not giving the deer you're after a second thought. And this is where 99% of all hunters, I would say, ruin their chance of killing the deer they're after in the decision making while they're laying in bed in the morning right after the alarm went off while they're looking at their weather app. Because most of the time they hang their stands and they hunt their stands where the wind is right for them, and they're not giving that mature buck a second thought. Deer will walk out. I always tell everybody deer are fool's gold, right? They're bright and shiny. It's bright and shiny, but it's not worth a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. They're doing something completely different than what that mature buck is doing. That mature buck's played this game. He's been down this road. And if you think about it, most people think about a food plot, whatever, and the way that most people hunt that food plot, they're playing the wind for themselves. And they're not thinking about that mature buck and how he would want to use it. Like if the good Lord gave you a tool that was above and beyond everything walking on earth, would you just not use it? Or would you use it every second of your life? Because that's what we got, essentially. You think about a bloodhound, that's conventional thought is that's the best nosed dog in the world. He has 220 million scent receptors in his nose. That whitetail has north of 300. He smells 25% better than a bloodhound, and a bloodhound can smell at a rate that most humans can't even fathom. That being said, when people go hunting, most of the time, they play the wind for themselves. So they have that wind blowing out in an area that's safe for them. And then they're asking a mature buck, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old buck to stand up and walk during daylight hours with the wind hitting them in the back of the head. And if you think about it, it's the most idiotic thing you could possibly do. It's literally the definition of insanity. That's why people just repeat hunting that way, expecting a different result. And it's not going to happen. You might as well get yourself a 12-pack of beer, watch your favorite football team. You're going to see the same number of big deer today.
That's a good point, because I don't know how many times, whether it be public or heck, even my own family land, it's like, it's more segmented in a way, but it has like a little piece of thick timber that I consider bedding. And I know it is, but the only time I'll hunt it is if the wind's blowing right in my face and I'm waiting on them to walk right out of there. And now that you mention it, that's a key fact. Like it clicked just now.
I'm telling you. And here's the thing. I mean, I'll give you a homework assignment if you're wanting to do it. And it's an easy one. I promise.
Okay.
It's an easy one. It's an easy one. And it's one you actually might want to like, you might like. Go back and think about the last 5 truly mature bucks that you've seen out of the tree stand. If you play the wind, think about you know what wind the stand that you was hunting in was blowing that day, because if you play the wind, you know what that stand that day, that wind was what it was. Now, think about where that buck came from and think about where that buck went to. And I'll bet you the entire 401k plan that 99 out of every 100 of them's quartered into the wind. Now, here's the thing. If his nose was up a doe's ass, all bets are off. You could catch him at the Taco Bell parking lot,
Yeah.
And I make that analogy because I literally watched a Boone and Crockett deer chase a doe right through the Taco Bell drive-thru in Burlington, Iowa. right through the middle of the day. And it's in the middle of town.
My out usually gets stinky after Taco Bell too, so I don't blame him.
Yeah. But the thing is, if he has all of his cognitive abilities about him, well, think about this. You guys are from Texas, and usually this works pretty well. You guys ever rattled at a buck?
We have small. We're actually both from Oklahoma. Jake lives in Texas,
okay.
and
I apologize.
I'm moving back up to. Yeah, don't call me a Texan. That's disrespectful.
No,
I live in Oklahoma.
Sorry. You're a Sooner. I got it.
We're actually Pokes. Yeah, we didn't go to OU either. We're like the black sheep of our family.
Okay, fair enough.
But go ahead.
Well, what I was getting at, usually in that area of the world, they typically get pretty positive results to rattling, is what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. If you've ever rattled at a buck, a mature buck, even if you blind rattled, whether you blind rattled or whether you seen him and rattle and you had a positive result, let's say that he closed the distance in some manner. What did he do? He circled downwind. I guarantee if he doesn't have to expose himself to the wide open, I guarantee you he circled downwind. Now think about this. Do you think that is an anomaly that he just does only when he hears two antlers smashing together? Or do you think you're getting a glimpse into how he thinks every day of his life? Because I'll bet you everything that if you rattled at him and then you seen him afterwards or you had a positive response, he thinks you're deer. He don't think you're some, hunter hanging 20 feet off a tree, clacking two antlers together. He thinks you're a deer because he's closing distance. If he did that, what's he do? He circles downwind. So he thinks you're deer, and yet he still is going to circle downwind because he's using this he finds a mate, he finds food, and he finds danger all by that. And if you think about it, if he's walking around during daylight hours and he has something that is almost beyond every other thing walking this earth, well, you think he's just not going to use it? No, he's going to use it every second. Every second. How he beds, when he beds, where he beds, the way he's looking is all based off of his nose. 100%, and definitely how he travels, and especially looking for those. So he wants to put cover upwind of him, and he wants to get on the downwind side of the cover, and he wants to quarter into that wind where it's quartered into his nose. Because then he can smell everything ahead of him. So now, and the analogy I always use in consults are think of it like this. You could probably catch me at the ballet, but it's only because my pretty little wife took me there kicking and screaming. I don't ever want to go to the ballet. I have no interest ever of going to the ballet. But there is a golf course right up the road from me, and I love to golf. I have a baseball swing, and I'm not very good at it, and I get worse as I drink. But as a general rule, it's a lot of fun. And if you're a friend of mine and can't get me on the phone, if it's a nice summer, spring, early fall morning, you could probably catch me at that golf course without even trying to call me. You could go up there and it's a trait of mine. You know where to find me, is my point. When you ask a deer to stand up during daylight hours and walk with the wind hitting him in the back of the head, you're asking him to go to the ballet, and he has no interest of ever going to the ballet. And you'll repeat it. I mean, take as an example, I'm certain you guys do this. If you follow any of the hunting community's website, I think social media is the devil as a general rule, but I have to do it because of what I do. Yeah. But the moral of the story is I see all the time people post up a picture. Usually it's a Boone and Crockett class deer that's walking past the camera. In the background, you see his stand. And the guy's like, gosh dang it, the last 2 days I hunted this stand, and now today the wind's wrong and I can't hunt it. And there he is. Just my luck. No, No, it isn't just your luck. You're asking him to go to the ballet when you hunt that every time, and he ain't going to do it. But when the wind's right, he'll head to the golf course. He's got no problem doing that. When the wind's right for him, he whirls out there.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is brought to you by Numa Outdoors. Growing up, I remember waddling around the woods looking like the Michelin Man and still freezing my butt off. But thanks to Numa Outdoors, those days are over. It's not just about staying warm. When I go out hunting, I need to know that I have gear for every single thing the woods might throw at me, whether it's heat or rain or cold. Numa Outdoors offers quality gear for every pursuit. If you're looking for quality garments backed by a lifetime warranty, make sure to go to NumaOutdoors.com and use code HA20 for 20% off at checkout. Whether we're chasing whitetails here in the South or we're headed out west to get after some bugling bulls, we trust Numa Outdoors and we hope you will too.
So many people are so close to being right in their stands and stuff. They just are thinking about it in the wrong way, and they're approaching trying to kill the deer they're after in the wrong manner. They're asking him to do something that he never wants to do. And I can't stress that enough. I mean, I try to pound that home because literally the entire everything is based off that. And I always talk about, a skyscraper is only as good as its foundation, right? Everything else topples if the foundation shit. The moral of the story is your foundation on how you approach the stand, the way you hunt, needs to be solid. And you think about how more successful you will be when you go from hunting when it's right for you and you're asking him to do something he never wants to do, versus if you change the way you think. And when you get up in the morning and you check that weather app and it says southwest, if your first thought is, how is that deer going to use my farm today with this wind to his advantage? And then I hunt according to that thought process. I'm 10 times the hunter I was tomorrow as I was today. 100%.
I think we could cut this episode right here and I would have a great takeaway. And we're only 47 minutes into it because as you're talking, I'm thinking of two separate deer. And I got a piece of family property that I've hunted since 2017. And the two biggest deer that I've had an opportunity at, I didn't seal a deal on one, and then the other one I got hanging right behind me. But both occasions, so the one that's hanging behind me, I just basically went in to go in just because I had a free evening to hunt. The wind was very, very marginal. I usually wouldn't go in there like if everything was up to me on that wind. But again, I had a rifle, so I went. And the buck literally came just like what you were talking. The wind was at an angle, now that I'm thinking back at it, from where he came out from. And then another time, he was probably, Christian, it was that 10 point with the broke eye guard. He was probably like a low 150s 10 point. Great buck for that property, especially. So that bedding I was telling you that I typically hunt around, I only really hunt it if it's a more easterly wind, just because, my scent isn't blowing into the bedding. Well, this deer, and mind you, it's kind of on the, it's on the edge of like this pecan orchard. So it's basically all mowed down. Yeah. And where this deer came into the field at from this other piece of timber was, I'm facing east. He was northwest. And so the wind's blowing east. And as he's walking, I assume, obviously it wasn't hitting back of the head, but he could see everything to the right where the wind was kind of blowing into. So he probably wasn't worried about that, but he was scent checking everything as he was walking from the bedding. So it makes total sense in my mind right now.
Yeah. My first Boone and Crockett class deer, I shot pure accident. I hadn't figured it out. I hadn't, it was pure accident, but by the way that it was set up, it was actually perfect. I had this pond and I was rowboating across the pond and then climbing straight up the hill, right into my stand and blowing my wind back diagonal across the pond. Well, I thought all the deer were going to come out of the bedding from the north, walk south right across the dam of the pond and out into my food plot. Well, does and stuff were doing that. And I had about 5 does right beside me, right, getting ready to walk down the dam of that pond. And the wind was out of the northeast that day. So, all the bedding straight north of me, the dam of the pond was basically east of me, and the food plot was south of me. And my wind was just clipping off the corner of the food plot out into open field. All that being said, the deer, I heard a loud grunt, turn around. The deer was coming from the straight west, right on that ridge top. He was downwinding that whole bedding area, walked within 5 yards of me, and I whapped him. And the thing was, it was pure luck. And I didn't even realize what was going on until after I kind of had my aha moment on how they use the wind. And then I got back to thinking about all of the encounters I ever had. And heck, I killed that deer. It was picture perfect, but it was accident. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing when it happened. But, in hindsight, it was picture perfect the way that it should have went. I just didn't realize it. He was doing something completely different than what I thought was going to happen. And the problem is like I said, deer are fool's gold, because so many times people will go hunt with the wind right. I go in there. When I say wind right for them, and 15, 20 deer walks out and they go home and their wife's like, how was your hunt? Oh, it was great. I said a bunch of deer, just not the one I'm after. Well, he's going to repeat that for about 90 days and not ever have the one he's after come out there, in hunting that fashion. You just got to think about it. It's kind of a juggling match, but you got to think about how he's going to use this wind and then hunt according to that, where he thinks things are right in his world, but you've got to jump on him. He can't get you without exposing himself or dropping off a ridge or being on the other side of a river. I like using structure to my back, where I'm putting my wind, down a deep ditch, whatever, use whatever I can to put my wind in a safe direction. Yet he thinks everything's right for him, but he can't get my wind. And then you're keying in on a trait of his that that you can key in on and kill him. You're going to be much, much more successful. I will guarantee you my big buck sightings, I would say tenfold, but that's probably a grotesque, disservice to what it is. You go in not wanting to see a big deer. You go in expecting to shoot the deer you're after. And it brings on a whole different type of hunt, and, whenever you utilize that fence and stuff, let's say you got cameras on both of those, fence ends or whatever, or at least facing at those. Now, all of a sudden, every time he comes in and out of there, he doesn't have 15 trails that he can go in and out of that grain field. He's got 2. Now, all of a sudden, I know which direction he leaves that food plot every day. I know which direction he comes into it. And it's awful funny whenever, that's the next thing I do. I take trail cam pictures, create files for my deer, name them whatever, Mo, Larry, and Curly. I literally have 3 of them. I name Mo, Larry, and Curly all on the same farm. But that being said, that I use those cameras, create files for each individual deer, throw all of my pictures in there, then pull up Weather Underground, and then pull up the date and time that's stamped on my picture of my camera. And then I type in the wind direction and speed and barometric pressure onto my picture and throw it back in the file. Once you've got 50, 75 data points on that, how that deer uses your farm every single time he's there. You might find out real fast that on a northwest wind, that deer daylights, let's say you had 100 pictures of him, but you only got 4 daylight pictures of him coming into a food plot in the evening. You might find out real fast that every time he hits that field during daylight, it's always with a northwest wind. The next northwest wind I got, where am I going to be?
There. Yeah.
Because you're taking those pictures and you're breaking it down and seeing exactly what wind direction he's hunting or he's moving through and about your property. That way, it is actually absolutely amazing the amount of information that you learn. you might have two different food plots or bait stations or whatever, and he might be hitting two different ones. Daylight sometimes at both of them, and you might find real fast that he's bedding between the two. And then the days that the wind's right for him to go to the east one, he rolls to the east one, and the days it's right for him to go to the west one, he goes to the west one. And again, powerful tool. And when you're trying to figure out where you're going hunting, so it's just taking all of the data that we can, kind of crunching them and creating a file, a portfolio of each individual deer and how they want to use your farm with the wind directions.
It makes a lot of sense. I shot a buck one time on opening day, a 7.5-year-old buck. And, obviously most of your prevailing cold fronts are going to be a good north wind. And we've got a really good north wind stand that Jake shot a buck at this year. But we had this kind of southeasterly wind, and that happened to be blowing exactly where they were bedding at. They could walk right in with that wind. And I run there and hunted. I was like, good wind for him, okay wind for me. Kind of just on that southeast, it was like it'll blow east and then just south. It's not usually at the southeast. And he came in, 5 minutes after legal light with the wind just coring perfectly into his nose. But I was off center him just a little bit where they're humming just where he couldn't get me. And he strolled in like the fattest cow you've ever seen. That slow walk, just strolling in.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense, but I feel like it changes, you really got to think through stand locations 100%. Very, very strategically.
Yes. I call it playing the whiskey wind. That's what you're doing. Don't get me wrong. I don't want him to get me, and I try to use structure where it's like he can't get me, but he also can feel very comfortable running this ridge or coming into this plot, on the downwind corner. Typically, they want to walk in on that downwind corner. So whenever I'm designing those food plots, a lot of times it'll be almost a boomerang fashion, or whatever. So I can put my wind, so they can come through the green, and then I can angle my wind across the no zone, and they're in the green feeding through to my pinch, but yet it's giving him the wind to his favor, if that makes sense. It's hard to describe without showing, but in a nutshell, I try to almost make it a little bit concave, and where the pinch is in the center or whatever, to where I can blow my wind across where that green it would be, if you will. But because it's curved, I'm just off of that green, which gives him the ability to come at that from the downwind corner and graze his way through with the wind in his favor. It's how they want to live. It's how they want to do things. So I try to lay it out to where that lays out right. And we've got him, but he doesn't know it, essentially.
So what would you do in a situation like, I know you said you want structure. Obviously, if you could come up a creek bank and they can't get behind you and the wind's perfect in that way. But what about going about like creating structure or brush where they can't come behind you? Do you utilize that if you don't have anything hard and fast behind you?
100%. Yeah. I will like, hinge cut trees in a line or whatever to eliminate trail, like a couple of trails. I always tell everybody, I want to hunt the core of my farm without having to punch into the core of my farm. Well, how do I do that? Well, I got to use structure or make structure to create that. Like if let's just say that it's a 40-acre wood lot, or it's a rectangle or something like that. If I don't, and everything inside that wood lot is flat and it's the same and whatever, I'll just see if we can't get a skid steer for a day or whatever and run a little path, through the narrow part of the farm, and then run a woven wire fence through it and create a gap wherever I want my gap, and say, okay, then I will smoke one side of the timber, create the bedding, try to put the food on the other side and feed them through that fence gap going out to the food. And I can slide in right along the fence where essentially I know that there's no deer trails crossing that, and know that everything's going to punch through the gap, and then utilize that gap as my pinch point. Make it, if you will. There's a million ways of doing that. I've used hay bales, and also I use hay bales for ingress and egress. So many people I see have, they'll put blinds and they got them 15 feet in the air. Well, that's all great and it's fine and dandy, but when you go try to leave, I mean, if we're bow hunting, especially when you go try to leave, you got to climb down those things and you're exposed and skyline to every deer that's out there. It's the epitome of hunting pressure. Because even if the deer you're after didn't walk out there yet, he could be 100 yards in the timber and you just blew 30 deer past him. The education process still took place. We got to leave there without him knowing. Hell, most of my blinds are not taller than 6 feet. Not taller than 6 feet. I'll tell you why that is. Because a lot of times I'll put a little half moon of round hay bales right in front of my blind. That way the top of the hay bale actually is a little above where my blind is at, the bottom of my blind. So when I go down the steps out the back side, there's literally not a deer in that field ever knew I was there. And then you slide out the back end and there 30 deer in the field stayed there. They kept eating. They never knew anything happened. So it's just little bitty nuanced things can make, the whole world. The epitome of hunting pressure. You go to that blind before any deer's up walking around. They don't know you was there. Yeah, you got in safely. If you're in a blind, you're probably not getting picked out of the blind while you're in the blind. But now when it gets close to dark and the deer that you're after is not there and you go try to leave, you blow up that field the first time and you had 30 deer in it. The second time you're going to have 18. The third time you're going to have 8. And the fourth time, and it's going to be a doe and twins and she's going to be walking out there doing this, looking the whole time at that tree or that blind because she knows humans are in it. And so does every other deer that was using that group line. The learned behavior, just like whenever you did something wrong when you was a kid and your dad lit that ass up. No different. The learned behavior is this. If I do this, the consequences are this. It only takes a few times for those deer to know if I hit this field during daylight hours, I'm at risk because a human sits in that little box right there. And it don't take any time at all. And you've educated every deer there. Just so your odds of killing that deer there are no, and you've ruined them. As a general rule, the only way you're going to kill that deer there is if he's right behind a doe that's in heat. She just blows out there and brings him to you. And that's only happened one time in my life. All that being said, our egress is about as important as it possibly could be for a successful plan. The analogy I always use is this. If you came home today and somebody was sitting on your couch, would you know it? Well, of course you would. It's your house. It's your couch. I mean, you of course you're going to know if somebody's sitting on it. You're not going to go sit in his living room. I don't even care if he wasn't there. I don't even care if he wasn't there for 2 days. When he's going to cut your track, inevitably, where you stepped in there too far or whatever, and he's going to know you're in there hunting. And now all of a sudden, you might as well have shot a rifle shot through his picture window because he now knows he's being pursued, and now things get progressively tougher going from there. But I always say that, to compound on that, if you got home today and mama said, hey, it's trash day tomorrow, can you run the trash out the back door to the alley? Would you know if somebody was hiding behind the back door? You're probably not going to know that. I leave him alone. Leave him alone at home. Let him be him in his house. It's whenever he has to leave the front or back doors where he's in trouble. That choke point. That's where I want to see him. Because if I see him, I'm going to see him inside bow range. And then I tell everybody this. Get the property, make the plan, enact the plan, trust the process. The trust the process part is the hardest part. Because, as the season drags along or whatever, and you're having a hard time with getting the deer you're after, especially if you're after a specific deer, it can be taxing, we'll call it, but you have to trust the process, and you have to trust the process that your plan will work, because I only have to be right one time and he goes home in my truck once. That's it. He has to be right every single day of season. I got to be right once. So as long as I have set up my traps and I can get in and out without him knowing I'm there, I want to basically, key in on his front and back door, because I know that's where he has to leave his house. That's how I want to kill him. And don't get me wrong, there's several people I'm certain you guys have talked to that's been very successful in different ways of killing them. But I always, and on my way is not the only way. And I'm always learning. Every big deer I ever pursue teaches me something. But as long as you keep your mind open enough to be not arrogant enough to think that you know everything, because I'm always trying to learn. That being said, the way different people hunt is fine and dandy for them. I'm just saying that the way that I hunt, I think is one of the more intelligent ways of doing things because, the reason I say because, is if I'm unsuccessful, if I do my plan and I lay it out proper and I hunt it that way and I just happen to be unsuccessful that year, hey, he just beat me at the game this year. He's still alive and on the farm and he still doesn't know he's being hunted. We both live to fight another day. But if you're super aggressive and you're grinding in there and you move him off the property and then the neighbor shoots him, or you've moved him off the property altogether and he no longer is there to hunt, now you've ruined your opportunity at killing that deer, period. I would rather be a ghost to them. Just complete ghost. Let them not know we're there. Make them as comfortable as they possibly can be in their home and then provide them everything that they have or want or a need. And then try to do it in a manner that it will bring them past me. And then, to your point earlier of your, the baiting or the feeder or whatever, right where that green and grain meet, where I've created that choke point, I start layering strategy like you wouldn't believe. But I'll tend to put it on the grain side because I've inhibited their ability to get into that grain. So I typically put it on the grain side. Like I'll tell people, listen, if you want to plant apple trees inside there, put 6 or 8 apple trees right there at that pinch. I always tell them usually do like 2 September, 2 October, 2 November, and 2 December maturing ones. That way they're dropping apples all fall inside that pinch. That's the only place I want them. Especially in Texas, I'm certain this would work really well. A water tank. I use water tanks in Iowa. They're practically more of a draw than any food plot that you could possibly have, especially in a very arid area. A lot of the ones I use are those 250-gallon round plastic cattle troughs, and I'll just fill up the thing I have in the back of the truck and go fill them up once every 6 weeks or so. They pile in, but I'll lay all of that strategy right in that pinch. And then deer love to scrape and rub, where there's a congregation of scent, So they, on those food plots, you ever notice around food plots or fields, they'll scrape every limb that hangs out over the field. I always tell everybody, take your saw and go down that entire field and cut every single limb he can scrape. Cut them all. Don't let him scrape on any of them. And then my scrape post right in that pinch and watch what happens. He'll walk across that field like it's his job to hit that scrape. So, I mean, just layer all of that strategy to where we're giving it to him, but we're giving it to him in an area that we can kill him in it. Don't ever do anything that benefits him, but doesn't benefit you as the hunter. We want to benefit him, but we want to benefit him in a way that he has to walk the gauntlet if he wants to get it.
So if, just to try to simplify things for my brain, let's say you're on a property, and if you break things into percentages, would you say like how much percentage do you focus on, that pinch point? Because what you said, that's probably where your stand location is going to be. That's where you want to have them in close range. I would assume that would be 85, 90% of your workload. And then, the green to grain scenario, and then maybe setting up the bedding. Is that just more of like the extra percentage, or how would you break that down?
Well, the thing is every farm's a little bit different. I mean, I'll get on one farm and it's chock full of cover, sanctuary for days, areas you can't even get into. And you're like, my gosh, every place is a bedding area here,
Yeah.
So, but hey, I don't have food. Well, then we will go heavily on the nutrition side of things, and don't get me wrong, you guys are far enough south that you're blessed in the fact that you don't have really bad winters like we do, in Iowa or Wisconsin or Minnesota.
Have winners, to be honest.
Yeah. Up here, having quality nutrition through the winter is a huge factor. I mean, if you think about it, do either of you got kids?
I have a 4-week-old right now.
Oh, okay.
Well, congratulations.
That's him. He's giving me terror right now, but I'm surviving.
Well, my thing is this: whenever your wife found out she was pregnant, or your significant other, the very first thing that doctor did is put her on prenatal vitamins, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
Very first thing. It is a medical fact that if she is deficient in any nutrition, she will pass that on to the fetus with a multiplier, an X factor, if you will. The lack of a better analogy here that I use, it might not be the greatest analogy, but I always say it's just like a crack baby, and my point with that is, if mom didn't put herself through all of those stressors during that gestation period, that baby would have been able, the good Lord would have blessed it and it'd have been able to reach its genetic potential. But because mom put that baby through all of those stresses while she was pregnant with that baby, once that baby's born, there is no medical attention, there is no nutrition that could bring that baby back to what it could have been had mom not done what she did, during her pregnancy. Now, it's no different in the deer world. Most people, and this is kind of where I was hitting to earlier on the food plot things, a lot of people, they'll only fill those feeders during season because it's for them. They'll only put out a food plot that's big enough to attract the deer for a little bit. It's a 1/4 acre or whatever. It's no meaningful food for the deer to make it through the winter. For us, more northerly, I guess, and the more, harsher winter side of things, that is paramount. If you think about it, a doe gets bred in our area, November, but you guys might be a little more in the January area or whatever, but, depending on where they're at in Texas or whatever, but it, for us, it's November. So you get November, December, January, February, March. At the end of April, they start dropping fawns in through May, and that's in April's basically our green up, once nutrition starts, growing again and there's meaningful nutrition that's growing out there for them. So those deer, if you're not providing quality food for them all winter long, they're merely surviving. They're not thriving at all. They're eating bark and twigs and, moldflower rose bushes and whatever, some honeysuckle leaves and anything that they can do to survive. But they're certainly not thriving. But the moment we provide quality grain for them to go get up out of their bed, walk to the food source, eat all they want, go lay back down, good Lord blesses them, and that fawn that's dropped is a strong, healthy, blessed young man. Now, here's where it all plays a part. I always tell everybody it's kind of a 5-year process, in my opinion. But, we try to assess our deer numbers on each and every one of these as well, and kind of come up with a number. But when we start adding food through the winter and we have these healthy buck fawns, what we don't want to do is lose them. Well, if you don't shoot mom next spring, when she's getting ready to drop that next fawn, she kicks that little buck's ass, sends it off, and it's to never be seen on that farm again. In our area of the world, that's 3 to 5 miles. I believe I've read down in your area, it's more like 15 miles is dispersal. Now, the recruitment that you get are the crack babies,
Nice.
So you sent off all of your strong, healthy young ones, and then, and then you recruited, what didn't have quality nutrition and set off on a proper plan. But if you shoot mom, that buck is yours to raise for the rest of its life. All or part of that farm will be his core forevermore. So, let's just say that number is 5. And don't get me wrong, we're going to shoot 5 does that all have button buck fawns on their hip in the fall. But let's just say Now, don't get me wrong, through attrition, you're going to lose some, whether it be, buck fight, EHD, fence, car, bad neighbor, you name it, whatever. You're going to lose some. There's no way of keeping them all. But for the purpose of the point, if you blink your eyes and fast forward 5 years, if the number has been 5 every year, you got 5 5.5s, 5 4.5s, 5 3.5s, 5 2.5s, and 5 1.5s that are all calling all or part of your farm, their home, their core.
The Hunter's Advantage podcast is brought to you by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. I used to be that guy lugging heavy gear down a steep hill after a big buck and regretting it with every single step. But now I use lightweight and dependable gear from Out on a Limb Manufacturing, and it has made a huge difference in my hunting and allows me to get to those hard to reach places. I do a lot of saddle hunting on public land throughout the fall, and a lot of those walks are 1 to 2 miles deep into the mountains. And in those situations, extra weight is not your friend. There's nothing better than walking through the woods and being able to get in any tree that you want. I've been running the Shakar sticks for a long time now, and the Ridge Runner 2.0 platform, and this past year I tried the Flatlander saddle from Out on a Limb as well, and all of that gear is extremely lightweight and comfortable. If you want to support a 100% made in America company, go to outonalimbmfg.com and use code HNTA15 for 15% off at checkout. Once again, that is code HNTA15 for 15% off at outonalimbmfg.com. We trust Out on a Limb products for run and gun hunting anywhere in the country, and we hope that you will too.
And from then on, it's Jurassic Park in there. Because you have done your part, and your investment into your farm's future is through that nutrition program and through the doe harvest and keeping those young bucks that strong, healthy, that's set off on. Remember that skyscraper analogy I used? There's no better one than right here. That foundation for this deer to build his life off of has been set off in the best possible course it could be. And if we're not doing the doe harvest and not doing the nutrition with it, we simply are playing Russian roulette with what kind of deer we have there.
Yeah, no, that's fun you brought that up, because that's such a controversial little subject, that because you talk to somebody and they're like, maybe they have a big picture of a deer, and let's say someone else on that property shoots it. It's like, oh man, I hope that big buck bred all those does. And it's like, after hearing about that study, how they, will go get pushed off 5, sometimes 15 miles. It's like, couldn't be more far from the truth.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing. Rarely do studies agree. But every study I've ever read from radio collar deer, it's almost 100% on both sides. It's like 97+% on each side. If you don't kill mom, 97+% of those deer are to never be seen again on your farm. If you do kill mom, it's like north of 97% that will never leave your farm. It's about the most absolute that there is in the deer world,
That's almost better than the COVID survival rates. I mean, that's
yeah. No, you're not wrong.
Yeah. Most people think about doe management as like a pure, maybe a numbers game, or taking, mouths off the ground, or, from that perspective. And what you're saying makes it kind of interesting, because it's more of a targeted doe management of, I'm trying to shoot does that are with buck fawns. So not only am I reducing the herd, I'm preventing disease, I'm also recruiting bucks through doe harvest, which is
100%
keeping and sustaining bucks. That kind of allows you to hit like 3 birds with 1 stone.
No, you're 100% correct. It is my belief it's close to, if not the number one investment you can do into your farm's future, in doing so. And then, people ask me all the time, well, when do you take them? Well, I tend to want to take them earlier in the year, because let's say that you're a little skewed on your buck to doe ratio. Let's say you're 3 to 1, whatever it is. But if you take 5 does off of the farm before rut, you might be, 2.1 to 1 or whatever, Well, all of a sudden, there's more scraping, more rubs. There's more vying for does. There's more response to calls. There's more, yeah, I mean, more of everything good on top of less mouths on the table to eat what food that you have planted for the rest of the year. Now, if you didn't shoot them till late in the year, then those does have ate on your food all fall long. And now that's less food for those deer that are going to live there to have. So I always say take them early. I mean, and make a contest of it. I mean, what I mean by that is if there's 10 does you got to take, get you two and one other guy and throw a 20 spot in the hat and be like, all right, whoever kills the most does with mutton buck fawns this weekend takes the 5 or whatever you want to call it. Make it enjoyable, make it a competition, make it whatever. And you could do it on each one of you's farm to get your management out of the way and get it out of the way right now. And you don't have to worry about it. Just knock it off. It's like when I got in the Marine Corps, my drill instructor, the very first thing they taught you was to make your bed and to make your bed proper. And the deal was, the analogy behind that, or the thought process behind it, is if you wake up and you get up and the first thing you do is make that bed and you make it right, you've accomplished a goal 5 minutes into your first goal's accomplished for that day. Set you off on the right path. Get there, get your doe management out of the way, accomplish that goal. Your season's goal's already accomplished there. Now we get serious.
Well, little do you know, we're both from Oklahoma and we love gambling. We have casinos here all over the place. So I think this is something we may be able to institute at a higher level, maybe a county or a state level.
You could do it however you want to. Make it fun. I mean, like I said, doe harvest can be, if you're doing it and you're doing it by yourself and whatever, and you got several you got to take, because some farms are just inundated with deer, then you need to take some does off, but do it in a smart manner and try to do it with your buck fawns. That way you're laying out, you're altering that buck to doe ratio, every year as you're doing this. You don't get that more back to where it's supposed to be, ideally.
Well, I'm interested too, because we grew up in Northeast Oklahoma. Jake still lives there. I'm moving up there here pretty soon. Again, we grew up in like a lot of cattle ground area, right? So there's very few farming operations. Food is definitely, for at least food from a farming standpoint, is very much a limited resource. There's good browse, there's acorns, pecans, like he was saying. How big of a superpower could that be if you were one of the few people that are solely managing for the benefit of a deer herd when everyone else around you is doing nothing of the sorts besides throwing out feeders?
I feel like that's a loaded question, because I feel like you already know it would be a massive draw, well, and then on top of that, and one's got to be smart. You got to plant what'll work, per that area. But in a lot of your arid or drier areas, alfalfa, as long as you can get it established, is awesome, man. Alfalfa, a lot of people don't know alfalfa is creates like an iceberg effect. I say, only about 10% of it is out of the ground. Alfalfa will tap a 7-foot root. It will get to moisture. You just got to get it established. After that, it takes care of itself on that side of things. Alfalfa is 30+% crude protein, 6 tons plus per acre a year of forage. Like it is about as good of a green tool as you possibly could do. That the less rain fall areas, milo works really well. Kansas is a perfect example. Milo used to be king out there. I'm not saying it still is, but I think it still is. But it'll grow fine in areas that gets 15 inches of rain a year, versus, we get close to 40, I think. But milo will grow really well in a more arid climate. It doesn't need near as much water as, say, corn does or whatever, So, you got to plant smart, but in the same token, I would make certain that having it in a browse fashion is way more powerful than, say, a tripoded feeder that's in there. You'll have much more success. at getting them to come to that. Don't get me wrong, you can still use it as a tool. Put that feeder, and I always tell everybody too, put that feeder inside. If we're doing the green to grain type of scenario, and we've got a good pinch, you can have that feeder 50 yards on into the grain side of the food. And the deer still have to walk inside 20 yards of you because of your pinch that you've created. Everything that goes on in that grain then has ramifications for them because they have to walk the gauntlet to get there. Is how, I like to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because you say that because where we're from is literally called green country. It gets like mid 40s inches of rain every year. But we had a lot in the southwest portion of the state, which is mid 20s. I mean, it's like literally like half the rainfall. And that's one of the issues that one of my buddies down there that manages a lot of ground runs into is I was talking to him about planting something maybe like a Dixie dozen. And he was like, good luck. It's like, we've tried all that crap. It's like, he was just telling me it's very, very tough because they'll go months and months without rain. And that was one of the questions I had for you. I guess alfalfa and milo is something to consider in an area like that.
I mean, sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you can, if it gets really, really dry, I mean, you can definitely kill it out. But, if you look out in Montana, in the bottoms where the soil's pretty decent, whatever, there's alfalfa everywhere, and then, out in Kansas, where I go out in Kansas or whatever, if it's a green field, like a clover or alfalfa, it's alfalfa. Alfalfa really does well in those. And I think they try to get them established in that fall part of the season because you're rolling into the rainy area of the year. When you plant it, it goes into the rainy area of the fall. It gets germinated, it gets started, goes through the winter, and then comes in the spring and gets another shot of an extended period or whatever of more rain anyway. So it gets itself good and established before it lays out into its first hot, dry summer. So, I mean, that would be the avenue I would go. And like I said, between beans, corn, and milo tends to be by far the crop that can take the least amount of rain and still do well. Yeah. That I've dealt with. So I'm certain there are people out there, especially farmers that might listen to this or whatever, that has better, a better side of things or whatever. I'm just saying off of the things that I have dealt with that, the milo has probably been the best on the grain side in the arid climate.
Yeah. So up here in Northeast, we have, good forage. We got a lot of oaks, pecans, we get plenty of rain. And around here, at least where I'm at, land is very segmented into like 40 acre chunks. Now you get those bigger land holdings, like with some like cattle ranches and stuff. And every time you walk into the taxidermist and you see a monster, you're like, I know exactly where that one came from just because. So with the problem being, I guess, maturity around here, you put that next to, let's say, Southwest Oklahoma, where Christian was talking about a second ago, where it's more dry, but the land holdings are a little bit bigger, a little bit less hunting pressure. Maturity is not a problem in those scenarios, but from us talking to our buddy Jake, different Jake, not Jake Schumann, that lives down there, him and his family has been trying to grow deer like crazy for probably the last, what do you think, Christian, 25 years or so?
Right. Yeah, 3 decades, pretty seriously, yeah.
And he was saying how, he's never even shot a deer over 160 down there. Now, every now and then you get those unicorns that, might go 170, 175. But right. Is that antler potential ceiling, is that a real thing? And if so, is that just due from the lack of water?
Back in the day, they always used to say that there was 26 subspecies of whitetail, but I think now they claim there's more than 40 or whatever, whether that's whatever. And some subspecies definitely have a ceiling on their antler growth. I say ceiling. Nothing's absolute, there's anomalies everywhere, but But as a general rule, some of those subspecies do have seemingly a ceiling. But it's funny you ask that question because I was just talking about this. I think even maybe today or yesterday. But you know the difference between a grizzly bear and a brown bear in Alaska?
I'm going to try to shoot at either one of them. See 'em. Yeah.
Nothing. There's nothing. There's no difference whatsoever. The only difference is that the brown bears are coastal. They're within that 100 miles or 150 miles of the coast. So they get all of those different species of fish that are cruising up those rivers to spawn and so on and so forth. So they've got nothing but this massive steady diet of quality proteins and oils and nutrients and everything. And they can eat till they gorge themselves. And them dadgum things will be 2,000 pounds. And you get inland and they might be 500 pounds. And they're not a different subspecies or nothing. It's literally the amount of nutrition. The one is gorging themselves all they want on all of these fish. And the other one's eating blueberries trying to run down a caribou. It's, you know, they're not the same. I mean, they are the same, but it's different. And that's a long-winded version of saying, I really believe the bulk of it is nutrition. Like, do you remember Jeff Foxworthy?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Like he's out of Georgia and he kills giants down there on that farm, or at least he used to. I haven't been following him in recent years, but per Georgia standards, he kills giants. And I think it's simply the fact that he's got enough ground that he maintains and they reach age, and then he has put the nutrition to them and they are, showing the results, if you will. I truly believe that the biggest lion's share of that situation is nutrition.
So even if they have, loaded winter wheat fields, it's just due to the nutrients within
the soil.
Rooting. Okay, I'm with
the soil too. There's a lot to be said about that. If you ever look at the soil maps across the country and see where the best soil is, because and I think I said this earlier, even in our area of the world, more than half of all of the deer's nutrition is browse. So it's browse. I mean, if you think about it, it's simply a mathematics game. If that mature buck's laying in his bed nearly every hour of daylight, he stands up, stretches his legs, go to the bathroom, nibble around on acorns, mushrooms, browse, briars, whatever. If all of that is growing out of jam-packed, nutrient-rich soil, that plant is drawing all of that in there too. So everything that deer eats is of a higher quality than, say, in an area that does not have that kind of a soil content or that ability to get that nutrients out of the soil. So everything they eat above and beyond ag is just a better quality. And if you look at the Boone and Crockett chart, and then look at the soil chart, something pretty alarming is going to show up.
Yeah.
They tend to follow the same lines,
Yeah. I bet those are cardboard cutouts of each other.
I bet you're right.
It's tough too, because in those areas where you don't struggle to get bucks to maturity, most people are probably going to shoot the biggest rack buck they see, and whether that's a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old. And I use a buck that we had called Mr. Next Year as an example. We had this really heavy 8-point. We had 2 inside flyer tines that were 10 plus. They were like shared a common beam with his G2, and then he had a 5-inch dagger off the front. He made like a 40-inch jump, and we think he was probably in the low 60s type deer. And a guy we were on the lease with, our buddy Peyton, passed him like 3 times, and he got shot by a guy from Florida on an outfitted hunt on the next property over. And he's like, I'll never pass a deer like that again. But it's just those bucks that always have a chance to be extremely special it seems like those are the ones that get taken out. So it's hard to like get a good representation of the area because you're like, I would have liked to see that one at 5. And see
You want me to tell you my horror story?
Oh yeah.
I got a couple of them, but I got one that just resonates with me still to this day. In 2019, I had a buck showing up in the summer on camera, just a giant. It's giant. He had like 25 points. He had this entire row of inside tines on both beams. I knew the deer. I mean, I had pictures of him, sheds from him. I passed him up at 2, picture sheds at 3, at 4, he just exploded. Right. So it's the old adage that, do you tell the neighbor about the giant deer that you got on camera, but the neighbor owned like 900 acres, and I thought, well, if we don't kill it and he's willing not to kill it, this deer's probably going to make it. And he's 1 year away from being a mega, So I call him up and I show him pictures and I go through the whole thing. Here he is at 2. Here he is at 3. Here are the pictures and stuff at 4. Are you willing to pass the deer? And he's like, nope, I agree with you, Mark. We should pass this deer. We shouldn't shoot it, blah, 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 blah. November 1st, the deer walks under me. I film it, with my phone. Film it, let him go. November 3rd, my 17-year-old son passed him, filmed it with his phone. November 5th, he shoots it first chance he gets, 197-inch 4-year-old, we were passing up a 200-inch 4-year-old to try to get him to 5. And I mean, and don't get me wrong, people, look at you and they say, well, you're stupid. What would you do that for? That's a dumb move. But I knew he was a 4-year-old and I knew that deer was probably 1 year away from a 230 or a 40, I mean, that deer was 1 year away from just, but I'm not scoffing at a 197-inch deer. Listen, if the good Lord blessed me with one deer a year that was 197, I'd be the happiest whitetail hunter on this earth. So I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression there. I will gladly shoot that size of a deer every year, tickled to death, as long as he's mature. Now, I just didn't want to shoot a 4-year-old,
Right.
like that.
Right.
And where it really bothers me and where it still gets into my crawl today is my 17-year-old son passed that deer, because he and I both said we're going to pass it. I didn't ask him to pass it, but he followed through with the program, and passed it. And most people will be like, well, that's probably the biggest deer you ever see. Well, he already had a 203 on the ground, so he's fine,
Wow.
But well, it's that one right there is his.
Oh, I see that one. Yeah. I think I saw that one on Whitetail Cribs too.
Double drop, triple beam. Yeah, he's a gorgeous deer. I put an arrow through both of his shoulders on October 28th, and he lived. And my son killed him on January 6th, and he was hitting a tree about the size of a volleyball, just tearing up. He was fine. And when we got to him, my broadhead was still sticking out his opposite shoulder, healed up with the tip and one of the blades sticking out. And so we did an autopsy. And to tell you how tough these things are, if I got on here at the first 5 minutes and told you I double lugged a deer and he lived, you guys would probably have hung up. But
Yeah.
I promise you, we did an autopsy. It killed the top front lobe of both of his lungs. They were dark black and there's pocketed little holes and stuff. And like it killed a lobe in each lung, and that deer lived and was fine, healthy, fine.
So you've obviously probably heard of like the dead zone or no man's land within like the whitetail's anatomy, right? So do you think that's what that is? I
think, well, I did conventional thought. I knew I hit him high and forward. I knew that from the get-go. So I backed out. Well, he ran down the hill and stopped at the bottom of the hill and started coughing. I watched blood come out of his mouth. I knew I was in lung.
I bet you're already picking out the form at that point. You're like, yeah.
I thought for sure I got him. But I wasn't about to go after him because I watched him stand there for like a minute, and then he dropped down in the creek stood there for a while, and I thought he was going to go down there or lay down there or whatever. Didn't. He walked up out the bank, and then I watched him slow walk away, and he kept like coughing, hacking, whatever. And I'm like, I'm just going to back out. I'll come in tomorrow. He'll be up there wherever he laid down. He's dead. I got it. No, we went on a track for, well, and let me digress for a second. So whenever I shot that deer, there was $3. It was October 28th. $3 come through across the dam of that pond in the middle of a woods, a timber on the side of a hill. And the first one was like 140's 8-point. The second one was a deer that we had named Voldemort. We knew him for like 3 years and we'd never named him. That year, I was like, gosh, we got to give this guy a name. Well, if you watch Harry Potter, he who has no name. So we named him Voldemort, So 183 inch. I can tell you why I know that here in a second. 11-point. And I let him walk. Both of those deer walked within 10 yards of me. But I had that buck. My son named him D's Nuts. I don't know why, but that's what he named him. So that's his thing.
We know why. It's funny.
But anyway, he was on the dam behind. He was bringing up the rear of those 3 deer. So I let that 183 walk under me at 10 yards. And then he stopped and made a scrape and got himself a drink. So these other 2 deer had came across the dam of the pond, turned and went down the hill. So when he started coming, rather than following the path he did, he cut off the dam of that. He cut off the side of the dam and started angling down, off trail. And it spazzed me out. Like, I heard yank the bow back. And then I'm guessing, I knew it went that far, but I used my 30-yard pin, and he was, angled, down and away, and I hit him, high and forward, and it didn't go well. So anyway, I left the night. I left him there for the night, and I came back in the next day. As I'm looking for this deer, I get a text of Voldemort laying on the ground. That we jumped Voldemort up while we was looking for the other one, run him onto the neighbors, and the neighbor shot him dead. And then I didn't find my 203. So I lost the 2 Boone and Crockett deer on the farm. Right there.
So the neighbor of Autocadavid his ass then, huh?
Man. So anyway, he disappeared for a month. Did not get a single picture of that deer for a month, and then he showed back up, started showing up on camera. You could see the hole. You could see the broadhead sticking out that freaking hole right there, and a couple of the pictures. That's pretty crazy, but just to show you how tough they are. It double lunged him and he lived.
Wow.
So that was one of the things that I didn't understand either. It was all those lobes to the lungs, and it makes sense. Like, you see them sometimes get smashed in that vital V, and they're running off. Like, that one's dead, and they don't find him 800 yards later, and then a month later, like, yeah, here he is, and then just looks perfect.
Yeah,
you couldn't have placed it better.
You're like, well, how in the world did he live through this? Hindsight being 2020, had I just got down and got on him and kept him up and bleeding, I think I had it. But because I let him lay down and clog that up, he didn't drown in his own blood, in his lungs for whatever reason. And if he got it stopped, he lived. There's probably a doctor watching. Why don't you call into this? Yeah, why that took place.
If that's the circumstance, then in my mind, how I would justify it is that thing's a warrior and he probably deserves to live after that. Like, if he can hold that, take it.
Yeah, but he's a 203 double drop, triple beam, triple brow, both sides buck. He was 6.5. And my son, little kudos to that little sucker. But that year, so he's got a really cool picture. He's got a picture of a 176-inch typical 10, nose to nose with his 203, right? Pictures of them together all summer. Early season, youth season, he hammered the 176, and then in in, in January, he shot the 203.
Not a bad year.
Well, I mean, if you need another son, I'm down.
Yeah.
I'm a little ugly, but I'll. It's
Hey, it'll work out fine.
yeah.
That's funny.
I was going to ask you, or I guess pick at that wound a little bit more from the 2019 buck that your neighbor killed. Do you think he knew that buck existed? Because in my mind, if I was to tell my neighbor about a buck, my fear would be he wouldn't have a picture, and there's a possibility that if he don't have a good picture of a giant, he might not be as active during hunting season. So that's just kind of where my mind goes.
And you could be 100% right. He told me he did not know of the deer. That's what he had told me. Whether you believe that or not, whether I believe it, I don't know. But he did tell me he didn't know about it. But here's the thing. I mean, he said, listen, that deer's awful big. I don't really think I can pass it. I mean, if he walks by me, I mean, you can't expect me to pass what looks to be like a 200-inch deer. Had he said that, I've been, hey, no problem. Fine. If he comes by, then, I'll smack him, because I know that you're going to kill him if he walks by you, and he goes on both of us all the time. So, that's where my headspace was at. But to your point, but here's the thing, that guy shot a 252 in 13. Like, it wasn't like it's not like he hasn't killed big deer in the past. I mean, he had no legitimate reason to shoot that deer. That's all I'm getting at.
You see, the way you're throwing out numbers, I would be like really questioning it, but since you have the receipts and obviously pictures to prove it, I'm like, all right, fine.
I had a couple of trail cam pictures of that deer. So I got here in 2012, and that was 2013, my first fall here. Well, here, let me tell you a story. There's some receipts to this one too. My first year, I got here in 2012, right? And when I moved here, there's a friend of mine on Facebook, that just kind of knew me from my old television show, The Legends of the Fall. Right. I mean, he didn't really know me, but he just knew me from that. But whenever I moved here and I changed my hometown to this small little town, he it's the town of 1,000 people. I mean, he grew up there. He was born and raised at that place. So he shows up knocking on my door, and he's like, "Hey, man, I'm Ben. We're friends on Facebook. Whatever. I seen you change your town. Whatever." He's like, if you need anything, here's my number, all that stuff, I'll help you out any way I can. I'm born and raised here, whatever. He's my best friend here still to today. But he introduced me to a buddy of his that grew up with him named Bo. I won't say his last name. I don't know if he wants it or not. But all that being said, that year I shot 187-inch typical 11 point, right? Now, the trilogy of friends here, I shot the smallest deer by 60 inches between the three of them. Now, I want you to let that sink in.
I can't fathom it. That's a lot of ball.
Because I shot it was 186 and 6/8 was what mine scored. It was a typical 11. Ben shot a 246. It netted 231. Front page North American whitetail. Bo shot 246 that netted. Oh, excuse me. Ben's netted 239. Bo's netted 231. Both of them grossed 246 and change. My deer was the smallest deer by 60 inches. So
That's crazy.
I felt like I shot a basket rack comparatively.
No, I already know what. That's like hearing, my yearly salary compared to like Elon Musk's. You know what I mean? It's like the number's so high, you don't really even know how many zeros are attached to that. That's kind of like how I envision a 200-inch deer, or heck, even a 180 at this case. It's like, how big is it really?
Well, I will say that, people get the perception that Iowa, that, there's a Boone and Crockett deer around every corner and this, that, and the other. That simply isn't the case. But I will say that there tends to be more than any other state that I've been in, you know. But like if you just look at if we're just going off of sheer numbers and not breaking it down, you know, on any given year, Ohio will kill more Boone and Crockett deer than Iowa will, or Illinois, or Wisconsin, or there's several top producing states every year that put out, several big deer. Kentucky is another one that's came on pretty strong in recent years. Indiana, But what I always tell everybody is it's not apples to apples, because like if you look at Iowa, for the most part, up and down your western side, along the southern fifth of the state, and up the eastern side. So you got the Mississippi going up and down the eastern side, the Missouri going up and down the western side, and a lot of rolling hills and good cover along that lower fifth of the state, and random rivers that run into the center of the state. But there's not near as much covered acres in Iowa as there is in, say, Ohio. I mean, I don't know the actual numbers. Somebody could look it up, but for generic reasons, let's just say that Ohio has 2 million acres. Then let's say that Iowa was the same. There's probably a million, 4 or 6 of that in Ohio that's covered acres, that has timber and CRP and, whatever, deer habitat. Whereas in Iowa, that might be 220,000 acres, not near the numbers. So if you look at it in that side of things, let's say the same number of Boone and Crockett deer are killed or close, in both the states last year. Iowa did it in a fractional amount of covered acres that Ohio did. So you could reasonably assume that the number of big deer per covered acre is far more in Iowa than, say, Ohio. If that generic analogy, you understand it, but
Yeah.
or if I described it well, I guess. Iowa is truly blessed, and the DNR's done a really good job at that on their, the way they run tags and all of that. And there's a lot of people that's upset about that too. Like, gosh, I can't get a tag, but for every 5 or 6 years or whatever. Well, I do get that. And here's the thing. I'm a transplant. I'm from Illinois originally. I tell you how crazy I am. I worked at the prison system. I threw in a transfer. I hunted Iowa one time. I got a tag, an out-of-state tag. We had a lease in Southwest Iowa. I went over there. I hunted, and I kid you not, hand on the Bible, 15 seconds. It might not have been 15 seconds. I killed 166 and 16 point. It's right over there right now. And I'm like, okay, I got to move here or something, and I started enacting the plan then. Because
straight to U-Haul. Yeah.
So I put in a transfer to 2 prisons that butted up next to Iowa, and the first place that called me, I accepted the transfer, and I moved my family to an area that I have no family, nothing. I moved here. Thank God for an understanding wife, because we moved here knowing nobody, knowing nothing other than the fact that my address was going to have Iowa on it. That's it, for the sole purpose of deer.
That's a good story to tell people when, you get those comments on social media where it's like, oh, must be nice. It's like, yeah, it was nice to completely uplift my life and move to where there actually are big deer.
Yeah. And I was in Illinois, it was okay. But, that was right at that time frame. That was when Illinois, the DNR side of things, were kind of, for lack of a better analogy, and I'm sorry, but like whoring out the deer. They started, it was like they had like 8,000 tags every year, and they moved it to 10 or 12, and then they moved it to 15, then they moved it to 25,000. And now you basically can buy them over the counter because they never sell out of tags, and I seen the writing on the wall, and I'm like, if I want to stay in this game and pursue my passion, I need to make the move. So that's what I did.
So that's kind of a good alleyway. We've talked about, the type of soil, the right land management strategies, but how important is the state's regulations, like alongside of that?
Oh, I think it's huge. I mean, and don't get me wrong. And again, I'm not getting down on Illinois or say Missouri or whatever, because I mean, they're both really good states by their own right. But by and large, I think there's a lot of big deer in Illinois because of landowners, because of people that are doing it, not because of the state. I think the state has gave in to lobbyists and insurance companies and whatever, and they just want deer dead. They don't care. They don't manage, but it's just a number. It's a black and white number, and that's where they're at. And they try to get in as much money as they can and whatever. But Illinois still is a trot producing state every year. That is a true testament to the soil, the nutrients, and the people that own the land that are managing it. I think it's got big deer in spite of the way the DNR has went on that side of things. I think Iowa has the same kind of soil type stuff. It's just that their DNR structure is done in a manner that kind of is it helps produce those types of deer. So whereas like Missouri, Missouri's an awful good state. If they got the rifle season right out of the center of the rut, I think they would be a monster, because they've got the same soil type. They got, heck, I from my house, I'm 30 minutes from Missouri. I'm 4 minutes from Illinois. I live on the river bluff, and I drive a few hundred yards and I'm looking at Illinois across the river bottom, so.
Well, you need those beacons of hope of like, hey, this is what it can be when done right. Like I like kind of juxtapose like New Mexico and Oklahoma. Like New Mexico makes residents draw tags for elk. Yeah. It's like, this is what we have. Our resource is going to be great. I don't care where you're from, who you are. We're going to give more tags to residents and less to non-residents, but they prioritize the resource over everything. And it shows. Like, it's awesome.
Oklahoma's the same way. I mean, somewhat as Missouri. Like, the heart of our rut is in November, and that's exactly when the rifle season is. And it is an absolute slaughter fest when it comes to, at least from Facebook posts and stuff. And alongside with that, our resource can probably withstand it, but there's a big debate in Oklahoma about, the $1 versus the $2, which should help. But as a person who's been to multiple states, what is there actually any benefit from like the $1 to the $2? I mean, obviously, probably because age class and stuff. But what's your?
Well, I'm going to show my age here a little bit, but I remember when Ohio wasn't a $1 state. I also remember when Indiana was not a $1 state. Both of those states have came on like freight trains since that has happened. So it's pretty hard to argue against results. And I've been walking on this earth, thank God, long enough that I've literally watched those two states turn inside out compared to what they used to be. And again, if they did just a few little amended things on their seasons and so on and so forth, I think they'd be that much tougher. But I mean, think, 15 years ago, you didn't hear much about Indiana ever killing big deer. Now there's some megas taken out of that thing every year, So I think that is a true testament to the $1 state side of things. Kansas has been a $1 state for as long as I can remember. They've been killing giants forever. I mean, I can't remember when they weren't killing giants out there.
Yeah.
Especially big non-typicals. I don't know if that's just in the genetic trait or that subspecies or what's going on there, but they are a non-typical giant. They might be number one in the country for upper end non-typicals. I don't know. They'd be really close if they're not.
Yeah.
Which I understand it from, residents' perspective. And, the $2 tags allow people to hunt elsewhere with buddies, and it helps keep tradition alive in a sense. And also with the extremely liberal, rifle season like we have smack dab in the heart of rut, you also get that backlash of, well, I have a 9 to 5. I can only hunt 2 weekends a year. And of course, those are the weekends that they're going to take off, or weeks that they're going to take off. And so I know the state is like kind of getting gripped by the nads a little bit on that. But as an Oklahoma resident, I think I would agree as well. I mean, I know I don't have much experience. I'm 27 years old in the grand scheme of things, but the Hunter's Advantage podcast is brought to you by Out on a Limb Manufacturing. We've been using Out on a Limb for many years now, and this upcoming season will be no different. When it comes to good saddle hunting gear, I think of weight, packability, durability, and efficiency. And simply put, Out on a Limb checks all of those boxes. Before we got into saddle hunting, I'd be going back and forth, taking either a climber or hang on. And an issue I found was as I'd be walking through the woods, it seemed like it would always get hung up on something, whether that be low-hanging limbs or a patch of saplings. And not only does that get annoying, it's not very stealthy either. And when you find a good spot to set up, you're still pretty limited to which trees you can sit in. But these saddle hunting systems change all of that. With their selection of saddle platforms and one sticks, Out on a Limb can hook you up with the right setup to help you deflate that big old target buck. To order yourself a high quality saddle system that's made right here in the USA, just go to outonialimbmfg.com and use code HNTA15 for 15% off anything on their website. Again, the code is HNTA15 for 15% off. We trust Out on a Limb's products to run and gun anywhere in the country, and we hope you will too. Just comparatively, if you look at those $1 states, I mean, I agree. I think the resource as a whole, and I think it would be like a quality over quantity perspective, especially when it comes to whether that be allocating non-resident tags for funding or what have you, the experience will be better overall.
Sure. Well, and then to your point here, and I'll just give you a few different nuances as far as Illinois versus Iowa. So Illinois is a $2 state, but you can put in for tags and you can have a first and second shotgun season tag and a late muzzleloader or a muzzleloader tag plus 2 archery tags. You could be holding on to 5 either sex tags, and then you just kill your $2 by however it is you get to $2. And then everything after that's just considered a doe tag. Now in Iowa, you get 1 archery buck and you get 1 gun buck. So if you don't gun hunt, then you're a $1 state. If you don't bow hunt, you're a $1 state, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the difference there is when I was in Illinois, say if I had if it was October 25th and I had a 155 or 60 inch mature buck come by, I would whap that sucker in a heartbeat. And if it was a good day, I'd just knock up another arrow and hang my bow up and be like, okay, I know he's right there. I might ride this out because now I'm waiting on, the other big one that I know about or whatever might be the case. In Iowa, when that deer comes by, you have to be willing to say, am I going to end my archery season on this deer? Well, a lot of times, if you're serious about it and you got pictures of a lot bigger deer or whatever, that deer might make it. You might pass him up and then all of a sudden he makes it through the rest of the season. And then next year he's a giant. So I just believe just off that slight little nuance, there is a huge change or a huge difference between the 2 states. That's the first thing. The second one is on the gun side of things. When you get a gun tag in Illinois, it's a first and second shotgun season tag. So if there's 200,000 people with a shotgun tag opening morning on Friday, there's probably 199,000 people in the timber. Like in Iowa, not that way. So they break it up. There's an early muzzleloader. It's in October, but then you have a first shotgun that's in December, a second shotgun that's after that in December, and then a late muzzleloader the last part of December into January. You have to declare by which tag you're getting for that gun tag. So, let's say you're going to do late muzzleloader. You get your late muzzleloader tag, and you don't have a first, second shotgun early muzzleloader tag, nor can you get, let's say you think you're on a big one and you're going to early muzzleloader hunt him and you are unsuccessful. Say it didn't work out, you didn't get him, and that tag went left empty. You're done. Your gun seasons are over. You don't get any more. So, and then don't get me wrong, it's not exactly this way, but on the simple man's math, there's 4 different seasons. If 25% of the gun hunters were broke up evenly between the 4 seasons, you never have more than 1/4 of your gun hunters in the timber any at all at any time of the year. Versus in Illinois, if there's 200,000 tags, there's 200,000 people in the woods on Friday morning. So every 3-year-old that stands up and stretches his legs getting some hot shot at him, so it's just, it's a different, very small changes, but huge ramifications on it.
I like what you said there because the $2 thing just gives you too many cards in your hand to gamble with. Your scope's a little hazy, open and morning rifle season, and you're like, I'll ground check that one. I'm gonna shoot that one, and then I'll be picky on my second one. Everyone always says that, right? And what happens? That second one is always 99% of the time is bigger than that first one.
Yep.
Always is.
Yeah.
Every single time. Why is that? Because they're going, I don't want to downgrade. I want to upgrade, but I want to try. I'm gonna gamble on this first one. Happens all the time.
So if you turn around and wait, if you only got one tag, it's huge difference. You're willing to set on those hands a little longer. I got buddies that's came and hunted with me from Illinois, or whatever. And I was telling them, listen, the hardest thing that you're going to have to do is set in that stand and set on your hands because, you're going to have a pile of deer walk past you that you otherwise would never pass in Illinois. Because you just are. You're going to have those 140s and 50s class deer just, cruising through. And at home, when you're setting on 2 tags, the whack, and then you knock another arrow, or you tag that deer, you get him out, and then you go on about your business, and you're now hunting for the giant. But in Iowa, you have to be willing to end your season, when you pull that trigger. So a deer that otherwise will not live in other states get passed. And that's what now the $1 state plays that same rollout, that same scenario. If you got $1, that's it, and all your serious guys, they're gonna hold off, and those deer, I like the deer's odds for a lot of people. And I'm not trying to sound egotistical there, but there's a lot of guys out there that it's either sheer luck or they're not ready to try to kill 5+ year old deer. If that deer gets past a 4+ year old, even if you pass up a quality 4-year-old, he probably is going to live, but he 100% isn't going to live if you put an arrow through it, so, you might as well give him the chance.
That is true. No, you gotta really know who you are as a hunter, especially in those $1 states. Cause we were both in Kansas, which was a couple years ago, I think 2022. And we both passed deer that we definitely would have shot at home, especially, the first tag is as bad as it sounds. And we ended up going to the season. I ate tag soup. Christian shot a buck not quite as big as the one he just passed. And it's like, at the end of the season, you could be really kicking your butt. So that's why you really got to be set in your ways.
Oh, yeah. I found the deer out there in Kansas, they roam so far. It blows my mind comparatively to the deer here. Like those deer will get out and stretch their legs. We had one par that we hunted in North Central Kansas, and the guy's like, "Hey, you can hunt this pasture." That pasture's like 11,000 acres, right?
Oh God.
And we had cameras on a couple of different drainages that were about 2 miles east to west apart. and then like 4 miles north to south, you know. So, I mean, we're talking about several miles away. And we was getting the same buck cruising through those all the time. Like a lot of times we'd get him on 8 or 9 of our cameras strung throughout all of that in the course of a day. He was just walking. You're like, my God, I cannot believe that deer travels that far. But he was doing it consistently, you know.
That's like crawl as a twin or something.
I mean, he wanted to go real bad. He was willing to put in the work for it.
Imagine sitting there, you're bedding air, and you're like, it's 3 miles to the next one. Let's just do this. And then he just takes you.
I mean, if we was smart enough, if the deer got past us and we seen him and we just seen the direction he was headed, we should have bailed out of the tree and went and got in the truck and pulled ass down to the other.
Yeah,
Nobody's gonna roll through there 4 hours later, you know.
That's one of them mornings where you check your phone. It's like, all right, cool. He was on the camera at 2 a.m. So I'm just going to sleep in today because now he's 6 miles away.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You know, if you're out there and you're hunting on a 160, 160 acre farm, that's all you got. Well, I mean, you got to be willing to shoot deer that you're not familiar with, because I mean, there's no telling where the deer that comes through is from.
Yeah. Well, Mark, we really appreciate you doing this, man.
Oh yeah.
Hours out of your Thursday evening. We really enjoyed the conversation and love to talk to you again at some time, obviously. But for folks that want to keep up with you, or maybe someone on here's a little older and they want some consulting services, where's the best place for people to get a hold of you?
My number is 217-320-1285, and my email is lusterslandconsulting.com. You can reach me on either, or I'm on Facebook. Again, I think it's the devil, but I have to do it because I tell my wife I'm a work in progress. I get sucked into some of them conversations that I never should get into. So I try to post and ghost now. I'll post something and I don't even comment to it anymore because you inevitably get the keyboard hero that's got a lot to say, and I just, my temperament isn't such that I can handle that very well. And like I said, I'm a work in progress. So I'm getting better at it as I mature, but my wife says you're 51 years old. You probably should have made it there by now. So but yeah, you can get me on Facebook too. So any of the three.